The ballroom shimmered with the kind of elegance only the wealthy could afford. Golden chandeliers, marble floors, and a silence worth millions. Every glass clink carried whispers of power, every smile a silent negotiation. But beneath that glitter, one act was about to stain an empire forever. When he entered, heads turned, not because of his tailored suit, but because he wasn't supposed to belong there. At least, that's what some believed. Marcus Ellison, the newly appointed CEO of Ellison Dynamics, had built his company from a garage to global dominance. But in this room, he was still a surprise. At the far end of the table, a woman in diamonds watched him approach. Her husband, Richard Hale, heir to one of America's oldest fortune dynasties, had just signed a billion-dollar merger with Marcus's firm. Cameras flashed. Glasses raised, and then the unthinkable happened. A slow motion of disbelief, a glimmer of crimson, as the billionaire's wife tilted her hand. Red wine cascaded down Marcus's chest, dripping onto the marble, soaking his shirt like spilled arrogance. Gasps froze mid-air. No one spoke. But in that silence, Marcus's calm eyes locked onto hers, not with anger, but with the quiet, devastating look of a man who had already won, because she had no idea who really owned the deal now. For a full 5 seconds, no one dared to breathe. The violinist stopped mid-note, waiters froze mid-step, and a $1,000 bottle of champagne hissed open in the background as if mocking the silence. Marcus Ellison stood still, wine dripping down his cufflinks, the stain spreading like slow fire. But his expression never changed. Calm, collected, calculating. The woman responsible, Eleanor Hale, blinked. The kind of blink that hides shock behind entitlement. Her lips parted in a soft gasp, but she didn't apologize. She didn't have to. Not in her world. Around her, the crowd did what crowds always do. They adjusted. Laughter fluttered nervously, conversation restarted, and a few whispered excuses floated through the air. Maybe it was an accident. She didn't mean it. Wine slips all the time, but Marcus knew better. He had seen that look before, the subtle disdain that disguises itself as sophistication. He had felt it in meetings where he was introduced as the exception, in interviews where they called him articulate, and in boardrooms where his presence was always a surprise. The difference tonight was that this wasn't a stranger's party. This was his celebration, a joint gala marking the historic merger between Ellison Dynamics and Hale Global Holdings, a $1.04 billion deal that was meant to reshape the tech industry. Marcus had flown in his entire executive team. The world's press had gathered. The U.S. Secretary of Commerce was scheduled to make a statement at midnight. Everything was set to make history. And yet, in the middle of that triumph, one careless act of arrogance revealed the truth behind every smile in that gilded room. Eleanor's voice finally broke the silence. "Oh, my... I didn't see you there," she said lightly, brushing a hand through her golden hair, as if the red stain on his shirt were just a passing inconvenience. "You should be more careful." The sentence floated through the air like poison wrapped in perfume. Marcus smiled, a small, unreadable smile, and simply nodded. Of course. Then, without another word, he handed his glass to a waiter and walked away, leaving a trail of crimson droplets on the marble. To the guests, it looked like restraint. To Eleanor, it looked like surrender. But to Marcus, it was calculation. Because while everyone saw a black man humiliated at a white tie event, Marcus saw a room full of investors watching the future rearrange itself. As he stepped into the hallway, his assistant, Jordan, a sharp young woman who'd been with him since the garage days, met him with a folded towel and a look that said everything words couldn't. "You okay?" she whispered. Marcus dabbed at his shirt, looked up at the chandeliers beyond the open doors, and said quietly, "Better than they will be." Jordan frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his phone, scrolled through his emails, and opened a secure file labeled Phase 2 Ownership Structure. Inside were documents that no one at that table, not even Richard Hale had seen. Marcus's company had quietly acquired 52% controlling interest in Hale Global through layered subsidiaries over the past 9 months. The merger, publicly framed as a partnership, was in truth a strategic takeover, and in 24 hours, the world would know that the Hales didn't own the billion-dollar deal anymore. Marcus did. But that wasn't the point. The point was dignity. He could have confronted Eleanor. He could have humiliated her back. But he understood something deeper. The real revenge wasn't loud. It was silent, signed, and sealed in ink. Back inside, the party continued. Laughter louder now, music bolder, everyone pretending to forget. But guilt has a way of echoing. Eleanor's husband, Richard, caught her wrist gently, eyes narrowing. He wasn't angry, not yet, but worried. He had just witnessed his family's name dip into something far more dangerous than spilled wine. Exposure. Because the cameras had caught everything. Somewhere near the corner of the ballroom, a freelance journalist reviewing photos had frozen on one particular frame. Eleanor's face, mid-pour. Marcus's calm expression, the wine in motion like captured arrogance. It was the kind of image that didn't need context to go viral. By morning, that picture would ignite a storm, and by evening, every major outlet would know her name. But Marcus didn't know that yet. He only knew one thing: power doesn't shout, it waits, it smiles. And as he left the building, he wasn't the victim they thought he was the author of their undoing. By dawn, the city skyline glimmered like it always did, blind to the storms that brewed beneath it. But inside the polished glass towers of downtown Manhattan, one image had already begun rewriting reputations. It started as a whisper. A single tweet. Then came the storm. The viral photos, a slow-motion capture of arrogance and restraint, hit every platform within hours. Wine and Power trended at #1. Headlines split the nation. Billionaire's wife humiliates black CEO at gala. Marcus Ellison responds with grace amid racial incident. Ellison Dynamics merger in question after scandal. The story had everything: race, wealth, power, and pride. And it spread like wildfire through every news desk and dinner table. Eleanor Hale woke up to a wall of missed calls and notifications that blurred together into panic. The internet had done what it does best: judge, dissect, and expose. Every second replayed her smirk, her words, her gesture. No context could save her now. She tried to call her husband, but Richard was already in a crisis meeting at Hale Global. He had spent his entire career balancing on the delicate thread of public perception, and now one careless public act, had threatened to unravel generations of privilege. "Do we issue a statement?" one board member asked nervously. Richard's voice was steady but tight. "We wait. We don't feed the fire." But the fire didn't need feeding. It was consuming everything on its own. Across town, Marcus Ellison watched the chaos unfold from his office window. He wasn't smiling, and not yet. He wasn't celebrating either. He just watched, thoughtful, the way a man watches rain before it becomes a flood. Jordan entered quietly, setting a cup of coffee beside him. "You've seen the news?" "I have." "They're burning alive out there." Marcus didn't turn around. "They're learning," Jordan exhaled. "You could end them right now. Just one statement." Marcus finally looked up, his gaze sharp but calm. "No, let silence do the talking." He turned his screen, displaying a live stock chart. Hale Global's valuation was plummeting, millions lost every minute. Investors were panicking, demanding explanations. The board wanted accountability, and in the middle of it all, Eleanor Hale was the face of disgrace. But Marcus knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. He remembered the early days, the closed doors, the skeptical looks, the subtle dismissals. Not the right fit. Not our image. Too ambitious. The coded rejections that black entrepreneurs learn to translate fluently. He remembered sleeping in his car outside investor meetings that never called back. He remembered every polite rejection that carried a sting of something unspoken, and now the world that had looked down on him was learning what real composure looked like. By noon, the news had shifted tone. It wasn't just about the incident. It was about who Marcus was, his story, his legacy, his leadership. Old interviews resurfaced, him donating half his salary to STEM scholarships, his speech on diversity in tech, his quote about dignity being the quietest form of power. Public sympathy turned to admiration. Influencers, politicians, and civil rights groups rallied behind him. Ellison Grace trended next to Ollie's Wine and Power. By contrast, the Hales empire cracked under scrutiny. Reporters dug deep. Questionable donations, offshore accounts, labor scandals. Every shadow found its light. At 3:00 p.m., Richard Hale called Marcus directly. "Marcus, listen." His voice came low, shaken. "This got out of hand fast." "Eleanor is—" Marcus cut in gently. "Richard, there's no need to explain. I just want you to know she's sorry. We're sorry. We'd like to fix this. Privately." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Privately?" "Yes, let's release a joint statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. Reframe the narrative. We'll make a donation, set up a foundation, whatever you need. I can have PR handle it in an hour." Marcus paused, letting the silence breathe on the line. Then he said quietly, "You think this is about an apology?" "Isn't it?" Richard asked, desperate. Marcus's tone softened, not with pity but with finality. "Richard, I built my company from nothing. I've had wine poured on me before, in boardrooms, in interviews, in conversations that didn't need a glass. The difference this time is that everyone finally saw it." He ended the call before Richard could respond. A few minutes later, Marcus opened the secure file again. Phase 2, Ownership Transfer. He clicked Confirm. By the time evening news rolled around, Ellison Dynamics officially announced its acquisition of Hale Global Holdings, a full takeover. The Hales had sold controlling interest in a rushed, panicked move to stabilize their collapsing empire. In less than 24 hours, the family that once owned skyscrapers now owned silence. That night, Eleanor watched the news from her penthouse suite. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through headlines, showing her frozen mid-action, red wine suspended in the air like poetic justice. Her world, once defined by luxury and control, now felt small, suffocating. She wanted to hate Marcus, but deep down, beneath the pride and the shame, she couldn't, because for the first time, she saw what he had seen all along, a system that gave her power for nothing and made him fight for everything. Outside, the city lights blinked like judgment. Marcus, meanwhile, sat in his quiet office, surrounded by the hum of servers and screens. Jordan leaned on the doorway. "It's done," she said softly. He nodded. "Not yet," she frowned. "What's left?" Marcus looked out at the skyline, at a city built on stories like his. The world saw what happened. But they need to remember why it happened. He opened a draft post, one he had written long before this night, and began to type, "For every door closed in your face, there's a future waiting for your name on it. Dignity doesn't need defense, it just needs time. Tonight isn't about me. It's about what silence can build when words are wasted." He hit post. Within minutes, millions shared it. The rising action had reached its peak. The nation wasn't just watching a scandal anymore. It was witnessing a shift, because Marcus Ellison hadn't just avenged an insult. He had rewritten what power looked like. By the next morning, the world wasn't just watching. It was choosing sides. Marcus Ellison had become a symbol, the face of calm defiance in a world that still confused privilege with worth. Every news channel replayed the footage of the gala, the red wine, the silence, the stillness. Then came the aftermath. The billion-dollar empire collapse, the quiet dignity that echoed louder than any outrage could. In less than 48 hours, Marcus had gone from CEO to cultural phenomenon. Civil rights leaders quoted him. Magazines called him the modern face of power. High schools printed his quote on walls, "Dignity doesn't need defense, it just needs time." But Marcus didn't celebrate. He hadn't planned for fame, only truth. At 9 a.m., his assistant Jordan entered with the morning briefing. The White House reached out. They want you for a televised segment on leadership and race. CNN, BBC, and Times all requested statements. Your words last night hit over 50 million shares. Marcus leaned back, quiet. And the Hales? Jordan hesitated. Their lawyers sent a letter. They're requesting a private sit-down for reconciliation. Marcus stared at the screen, then nodded slowly. Set it up. Hours later, in a neutral Manhattan conference room lined with floor-to-ceiling glass, the two families met. The atmosphere was heavy, like a storm about to break. Eleanor Hale sat beside her husband, her posture rigid but her eyes hollow. Across the table, Marcus's calm presence filled the room without effort. No anger, no arrogance, just composure. Richard spoke first, his voice cracked with exhaustion. Marcus, I owe you an apology, not just for what happened, but for how long it's taken me to understand what it meant. We thought this was business. It never was. Marcus nodded slightly. I know. Eleanor's voice trembled when she spoke. I wasn't thinking. I didn't... Marcus raised a hand gently. You were thinking exactly as you were taught to. Silence. The kind of silence that burns. He continued softly. You saw someone you couldn't categorize, and that frightened you. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I reminded you that power doesn't always look familiar. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but there was nothing left to say. Richard leaned forward. We've lost everything, Marcus. Our name, our legacy. Marcus interjected, no, you've lost illusion. The legacy you speak of was built on people who never had the privilege to sit where I'm sitting. You're not being punished. You're being revealed. The room went quiet again. Even Jordan, standing at the corner, felt the air tighten. Marcus looked at them both, not as enemies, but as reflections of what society had allowed for too long. I don't want your empire, he said finally. I want change, the kind that doesn't wait for scandals to wake it up. He slid a document across the table, a new initiative. The Ellison Hale Foundation for Equal Opportunity in Business, a $1 billion endowment created entirely from the takeover proceeds. It would fund minority entrepreneurs, tech innovators, and leadership programs across underrepresented communities. Eleanor looked at it, stunned. You're naming it after us? Marcus smiled faintly. After what you taught me, she blinked, confused. What did we teach you? He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. That sometimes the most powerful lesson comes disguised as humiliation. He turned to leave, pausing only once at the door. And that dignity doesn't whisper, it echoes. As the door closed behind him, Richard and Eleanor sat in silence, the weight of their downfall settling like truth finally landing. For the first time in their lives, they saw how fragile their world had always been, and how one man's grace could shake it to its core. Outside, reporters swarmed the building, flashes lighting the air like lightning. Marcus walked through the crowd, expression steady, camera lights reflecting off his suit like armor. Questions flew like bullets. Mr. Ellison, did you forgive them? What happens now? Was this revenge? He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he paused at the steps, turned toward the sea of microphones, and said just one line, the line that would be replayed for generations. Power isn't what you take from others. It's what you build when they try to take your dignity. Then he walked away. That evening, every news network opened with the same headline. Grace wins, Marcus Ellison turns humiliation into historic change. And somewhere, in the penthouse where silence had replaced pride, Eleanor Hale stared out the window, whispering the quote to herself over and over again, not as a headline, but as a reckoning. Months passed. The frenzy faded, but the story didn't. It lingered, not as a headline anymore, but as a turning point. The photo that once defined scandal had become a symbol of restraint and transformation. University lectures cited it when discussing leadership. Corporations played Marcus's interview clips during diversity summits. His quote, "Power isn't what you take from others. It's what you build when they try to take your dignity," appeared on murals across city walls, office lobbies, and graduation speeches. The Ellison Hale Foundation grew faster than anyone expected. What began as an act of redemption became a revolution in opportunity. Within its first 6 months, it funded 40 startups founded by young innovators of color, opened 2 training centers in underserved neighborhoods, and announced a global initiative to mentor minority business leaders. Marcus never once took credit. He attended ceremonies, shook hands, and smiled quietly while others spoke his words for him. He didn't seek applause. He sought permanence. Meanwhile, the Hales disappeared from the spotlight. Richard retired quietly, selling off properties to repay debts and fund the very foundation that now bore his family name. Eleanor, once the symbol of entitlement, began volunteering at one of the community programs the foundation supported. No cameras followed her there. She didn't speak at galas or charity dinners. She simply worked, sorting boxes, reading to children, learning humility one small act at a time. And though she and Marcus never met again, their names would forever share a plaque, engraved in steel at the entrance of the foundation's first headquarters. From humiliation to hope. May this place remind the world that change begins where pride ends. Jordan often found Marcus late at night, still in his office, lights dim, overlooking the city. "You've done enough," she would tell him. He'd smile faintly. Change doesn't stop when applause fades. Then, one evening, months after the scandal, she walked in and found him holding an envelope. No logo, no sender. Inside was a handwritten note. "You taught me what grace looks like. For the rest of my life, I'll try to live it." Marcus read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it inside a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but closure. The following week, he was invited to give a talk at a global summit on ethical leadership. Leaders from across industries gathered, waiting for the man who turned humiliation into transformation. He stepped onto the stage, dressed simply, his presence commanding not by status, but by stillness. He looked out at the audience and said, "We often think racism dies when it's punished. But it doesn't. It dies when it's understood. When someone who's always been heard finally listens. And when someone who's always been silenced finally speaks. I didn't fight to destroy a family. I fought to awaken one. And maybe in that we all found something worth keeping." The audience stood in silence. Not applause, not noise, just quiet reverence. Outside the hall, news cameras waited, but Marcus slipped out the side entrance, choosing peace over spotlight. He walked alone down the city street as a light drizzle began to fall, washing over the sidewalks like a quiet cleansing. He passed a billboard featuring the foundation's logo, a white dove rising from a splash of red, and beneath it, small text that read, "Inspired by a true story." He stopped, looked up, and let the rain trace down his face. The world had changed, not because he shouted, but because he stayed silent long enough for truth to speak on its own. And in that moment, for the first time since that night at the gala, Marcus smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Because he knew the lesson had landed where it mattered most, not in the hearts of the powerful, but in the minds of those who would one day become them.